Welcome to The Author Show, where we present new authors and books. From fiction to self-help and everything in between, you'll find it all here. To watch the TV version of our program, visit authorswebtv.com. That's authorswebtv.com. And now, let the show begin with your hosts, Don McCauley and Danielle Hampson.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming to the program author Paul A. Toth, and Paul is the author of Airplane Novel. Paul's first three published novels form a nonlinear trilogy consisting of Fizz, Fishnet, and Finale. His short stories have appeared in over 100 publications. He also works in poetry and multimedia. As a bassist, he drifts towards a combination of jazz and electronic music. Toth considers music a major influence on his writing, particularly his staccato sentences, which he attributes to the strong impression made on him by John Coltrane's drummer, Elvin Jones. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
That's great. Well, the big question, tell us about this book, please.
Well, my novel, Airplane Novel, completely uproots 9/11, and it replants it in the reader's mind. I wasn't interested in creating sympathy, pity, or worst of all, closure. Instead, my novel opens 9/11 up to living history, where it in fact exists. Just as an example, remnants of the towers now exist in other Manhattan buildings, and those towers are very much alive. We should stop killing them and the memory of those who died and their survivors in the name of the impossible and absurd idea of closure. That was my purpose in writing Airplane Novel, and I would not have written an 9/11 novel otherwise.
So who did you write this book for?
I wrote it for people who want to read a novel about 9/11 that doesn't merely seek the reader's sympathy, pity, redemption, all the things that I think the event really has already used up. I wanted to give them something new, a new viewpoint, an inside-out viewpoint that you can't get anywhere else based on reasons I'll explain momentarily. So I would call the book an experience, a real experience, more than reading a book.
Now, is there any type of central message or underlying theme in the book?
Yes. The central theme is that because the narrator, as I'll explain, is non-human, it allows the human species to be seen as both creative and destructive, every single person. It delves into the reasons why people make the choice to go one direction or the other. And so its theme is that no one people is more or less creative or destructive than another. It comes down to individuals, and that the more people identify with a group, the less specific, or I should say the more specific they try to become, the more likely they are to become destructive because they attach themselves so firmly to an idea or a cause.
Now, there's been a lot of books written about this subject. What is it, in your opinion, that the reader's going to get from this book that they won't get somewhere else?
I think the main thing they'll avoid is literary cliches. There's a lot of literary novels that are very similar. If I go to the new book release section, I'll find novel after novel about an adulterous professor, for example. And in the 9/11 novels, I believe readers will find the same kind of thing, except with my novel, which purposely takes an approach that completely separates it from any kind of cliche, from our memories of what happened, the videos, we remember what portion of them, the sort of freezing of the event in our mind. It unfreezes it.
So why did you choose to use the South Tower as the narrator?
It struck me that no novel about 9/11 would really accomplish much using any kind of traditional means, no matter how literary they might be. And so one day it struck me that the South Tower as narrator would allow me to completely re-envision the events. It's fairly obvious that a building, once you get past the conceit, it completely amputates the event from traditional storytelling. So I could dislocate the event from human reactions and perceptions we already know. We know them by heart. We've had them ourselves. This book gives you something else, a whole new way of looking at 9/11.
So what were your goals in writing another 9/11 novel?
Well, it was the challenge, the just incredible challenge of trying to write a novel that would give readers the chance to understand 9/11 from that kind of radically different perspective. And again, I knew the literary novels, the other 9/11 novels, I knew what they would do with 9/11, that they would create essentially modern tragedies which wouldn't require the genius of the Greeks or Shakespeare to write, because it would come down to a kind of template. So my main goal was to write a novel that avoided all of that, presented what you might call the underbelly of 9/11, and in a sense without mercy, because it's written by a building that doesn't have the normal human connections that we associate with books. So I would say that the purpose was to produce what you could call an exploded view of 9/11, rather than giving people back the event once again is assembled by all the media coverage people have already absorbed.
So how did you manage to get inside the skin of a building of all things?
Well, that was probably the biggest challenge, obviously. I would say I had to become a kind of method actor. I did have to get inside the skin. And to help with that, I assigned a kind of cover story for the South Tower, and I chose an actor who would represent its surface character, and I'll probably get into this explanation of how that happened later. I chose Cary Grant for his elegance, his appearance, and above all, his nonchalance. To me, if a building could think and at least guess human feelings, I still didn't believe hysteria would be its response to threats. It would be cool, but not cold, and to me, that was Cary Grant. So, in a way, as I was writing the book, I was channeling both Cary Grant and my imagination of how a building would interpret the world. And so that eventually, though, the building, like most characters in my novels, and a lot of writers have spoke about this, began giving me the answers, and I didn't have to think so much.
Now, you've described this as the only 9/11 novel worth reading. Do you really feel that way?
Well, yeah, actually all three. I wouldn't bother reading the others because I already know what I'll find. They may well have literary merit. I'm not criticizing them so much, but I'm only saying what literary merit they have lies outside the context of the subject. That's to say, 9/11 could only be represented, in my opinion, by going as far outside the mainstream as possible. There's no fish in the mainstream. There's no reason to go fishing there. And so that is why I make that statement.
Now, you also relate this book to a Picasso mural. What's the connection there?
Well, that would be Guernica, and of course that painting represents the bombing of a town, so it seemed an entirely accurate analogy. And as well, the novel is a kind of mural of words that bends and distorts the subject, because the subject itself is bent and distorted. So it seemed a good way to describe airplane novel in a very short sentence.
So what techniques did you use to convey the perspective of the South Tower as narrator?
Well, that brings us back to Guernica. You know, Picasso obviously was a Cubist for most of his career, and Cubism was a big part of my research. It involved Cubist art, theory, most importantly, Cubist paintings and poetry. Now, a school of painting never quite works when put in words. Surrealist novels were never nearly as potent as surrealist paintings. So to get around this, I basically took what I needed and left the rest behind. So with the Cubist poets, I took the ways in which they played with words and undefined the subject. The poets didn't redefine their subjects. They left them unhinged. And to me, 9/11 is nothing if not the world come unhinged. And it really hasn't been hinged since.
In the novel, in what way do you explain how a building could write a book?
I don't mind giving this one away. I know a lot of novelists don't like to give away things like this, but I think it's important to help people get past the bizarreness of the idea. So here's the explanation. There's an ongoing constant debate as to whether computers will ever develop consciousness or, less accurately, really artificial intelligence. So I present a different answer to that question. What if computers already have consciousness, but they're hiding that fact from us? And so that is how the book presents the Tower, is with its computer networks running through it. It already has artificial intelligence or consciousness, but it didn't bother letting us know.
Would you say that you have a specific writing style?
Yes, I tend to combine genres so that, as I just explained in telling you how the building can think, etc., there's a sense of science fiction in this novel. And it's also a kind of historical novel because I dig very deep into the history of the towers. The book starts right from the beginning of, in fact, before construction of the World Trade Center. And so there's that aspect. It's also a kind of surrealist or fantasy in a sense because there are a lot of fantastic moments in the book, not in the sense of Lord of the Rings, but, a more dreamy kind of aspect. So I think that's one of the key markers of my books. And the other thing I would say is that rhythm is very important to me. And I've always said the highlight of my life would be to ride a subway and see someone reading one of my novels tapping their feet. That would tell me I accomplished my goal in terms of the writing.
Who would you say influenced your writing the most?
Well, as far as influences, like any novelist, it's really hard to choose a favorite because we all have so many favorites that one doesn't really rise to the top. It depends on which novel you may be talking about. But I would say J.G. Ballard would be one. He was a well-regarded science fiction writer. He died recently, but he was a very, very creative, chance-taking author. Another one would be the social realists, particularly Sinclair Lewis. Babbitt is one of my favorite novels because it does look at the world realistically, portrays social conditions and social conditioning, and does so with a great amount of humor, which exists in airplane novel as well. So I would name those two, not so much in terms of airplane novel specifically, but just in general.
In your opinion, who should buy this book?
Well, I think it will appeal to anyone with a sense of curiosity, a desire to explore an issue that we all assume has been explored to its end. But this book proves it hasn't. And so I would say to people, take a chance on this novel because you are going to find everything you're not looking for and not expecting.
Well, time is getting very short, so the most important question, where can we buy this book?
Well, the easiest way to obtain a copy would be any of the major online retailers, such as Amazon, of course. It is in bookstores, but kind of scattered. It's a small publisher, so it's not exactly in every remaining bookstore chain, with however many are left. So that's the easiest way to get it. You could probably order it from your local bookstore as well. It is on a major distributor, so it's easily ordered from a bookstore.
Could you spell your last name for us, please?
Sure. It's T as in Tom, O, T as in Tom, H.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Paul A. Toth, and he is the author of Airplane Novel, among many other things. Paul, thanks very much for being with us today.
I'd like to thank you for having me.